Good morning, everyone. I'm Adele Childress. I'm in the Office of Total Worker Health at NIOSH. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I hope that you have found these last days informative and had an opportunity to catch up with your old friends, but meet some new ones. I do want to take time to thank NIH, particularly Chris Gaines and the University of Colorado. I have been involved in the last 3 symposia, and this is the best ever. So let's give a hand to all of them. Thank you. So the session today, as Lee said, is approaches and challenges to improving conditions of work across industries. We'll hear about 4 different industries. We have 3 presenters. Our first presenter will be Jack Dennerlein. He is a professor in and interim chair for the Department of Physical Therapy, Movement and Rehabilitation Sciences at Northeastern University, and adjunct professor of economic safety at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He is also the associate director for the Harvard Chan School Center for Work, Health, and Well-Being. Jack is trained as an engineer. His research in occupational safety and health ranges from design of tools and workstations within the laboratory to the development and testing of total worker health programs in multiple industries, including office work environments, commercial, construction, healthcare, and transportation. Our next speaker is Dr. Lovejoy, Meg Lovejoy. She's the research program director for the Work and Wellbeing Initiative, WWBI, at the Harvard Center for Population and Development Studies. The WWBI is a research and policy program designed to develop, implement, and test evidence-based workplace change for worker well-being. At the center, Meg has overseen several studies funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation concerning the well-being of low to moderate wage workers. Her research has centered on work-life integration and workplace and organizational change with a focus on worker well-being and equity. Unfortunately, Suzanne Peters will not be here with us today, so Jack Dennerlein will present her part of it. And then our 4th presentation is by Glorian Sorensen. She is the director. I don't even need to tell about you. Everybody knows you. Okay. Tell about yourself. You're going to start. All right.
I'm Glorian Sorensen. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming us and making us feel so at home. I'm just feeling some time pressure because we have to be done by 11:30 when the Surgeon General starts. So we're going to move right into it. Thank you so much for a warm introduction. I'm Glorian Sorensen, and what we are going to present today are several examples of changes in doesn't work. We're going to be presenting 4 examples of organizational change interventions. This is really our presentations today were really coordinated with Karina Nielsen's plenary talk yesterday when she talked about how do we do organizational changes. And now it's working. Great. Thank you very much. And so what we're going to be doing is actually highlighting 4 example studies in 4 different industries in order to illustrate how we might adapt interventions to improving working conditions across these different sectors. So we'll look at construction, fulfillment centers, transportation, and food service. Additionally, trying to describe some participatory approaches to how we assess priority working conditions within these settings and hopefully make some recommendations. We're all going to talk kind of fast, trying to get at this. As we think of working conditions, we think about the underlying root causes that might influence worker safety, health, and well-being. And within that, we've heard about a lot of different ways of conceptualizing working conditions over the last few days. We're additionally thinking of the physical exposures, job demands, the psychosocial environment, as well as the organizational situation. So within this, we will, for each of the industries, discuss the four things here. How does the sector and the setting matter? How did we use a participatory approach for the setting in terms of our needs assessment? How did we identify the working conditions that we wanted to target and give you a couple of examples of how we did that? And then what did we actually do within the implementation process in terms of what actually makes a difference in the changes that we're making? What we want to do is try to do this within 25 to 30 minutes and allow time at the end for additional conversation. We're going to invite Karina to join us at the end for a Q&A, but we are under a little time pressure knowing that the Surgeon General will be joining us at 11:30. So we're going to try to stay on target with our timing. And Jack is going to start with the construction industry.
And so I walked right up. So I forgot there was an extra slide. So anyway, so the industry I'm going to talk about is the construction field, and specifically our program called All the Right Moves. Construction has a lot of health and safety issues and well-being challenges, lots of hazards, both physical and non-physical, high rates of injuries, fatalities, suicide, mental health, substance abuse. We've talked about a lot of those during this time. A lot of challenges to interventions, multiple employer workplaces, the figured workplace. The conditions change from a day-to-day basis. I mean, it's really kind of the work environment is changing by definition every day. And there's tons of small businesses involved. So when you look at construction, it's like, why would anybody do research in this area? Because it's just so challenging to do stuff, but yet the impact is great and the challenges and needs are high. We've been doing research in total work health and construction since for a long time. We've targeted unions, we've worked with foremen, we've looked at worksite programs, but the real employers are often the small subcontractors, and the ARM project was really designed for the smaller companies and the subcontractors. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So All the Right Moves, which really was sort of the culmination of 2 decades of research in the field to really address some of the issues that we observed, has 4 basic ideas. Sort of identify what's going on your work site, who the key stakeholders, and sort of plan, but then really use worker experiences to drive change within the organization. And we had to make it really adaptable to the different organization systems that we observed in all the years of work that we've been doing. And also think about, and this big challenge was, tons of work has been done on the physical hazards of construction and controlling those, but we wanted to go beyond that, include the non-physical working conditions, the other 3 wings of the butterfly that Glorian showed earlier. And this is actually a picture of us on site, and that's us doing our worker experiences, which was the key aspect of this experience, was where we sort of inverted the toolbox talk that's used in the industry all the time. And instead of talking to workers, we tried to listen to workers. And I was just in a mental health seminar before, where it's like ask, listen, and then act. And that's really what this program does here. But the toolbox talk, these interactive talks, and we're trying not to call them toolbox talks because people have visions of that, is really first ask what is good in terms of their safety and health and well-being. What are they proud of? What are they strong about? And then second, what can be improved? And then we move out from there to start thinking about the worker conditions. We actually, this image I'm showing you on the left was an image we had with us when we were talking to workers, really demonstrating that idea of how the conditions of work, can impact them, and then asking them, okay, about your conditions of work, what really supports your safety, health, and well-being? And then again, flipping that question to say, well, what can be improved? And then we collected this and sort of did, and categorized these things into good and bad, and what can be, and where in this kind of circle in terms of the conditions of work and what the company can do, where can things fall? So that was how we use participatory approaches in that, and at the frontline worker, and determining those experiences. Well, this is an example of one of the things that we saw. There was tons of things that we heard from workers during the study. Mainly, this example is about tools, access to tools, making sure workers have the resources to do the job. And when they don't, they get stressed. And that's the story here, where there were, this was a a bridge contracting company where the workers were stressed because they didn't have enough tools that worked. Many were broken and were not being maintained. As a result, some crews would hoard tools, or there would be delay, and then work would get delayed because they didn't have that, which then led to increasing time pressures. And so it just was a cascading of things, and everybody knew that they were fearful that they would get hurt because they were rushing schedules and sometimes using non-optimal tools. And the company, this was fed back to the company, and the company realized, hey, we don't really have a system to manage the tools. They had been contemplating one, but didn't really see the need for it. And this sort of example was an impediment, it motivated them to go out and actually develop a system and actually got a software to help them manage tools that allowed for systematic tracking and the like, and really changed how they did things on the job and allowed the workers to get tools in a timely difference. What made a difference was that, the safety management systems that were in place in some companies, or if they didn't have one, their management systems were improved by learning from the workers. They were able to learn things about their organization and how to improve them. It identified non-physical work risk factors. Other things we heard about was DEI issues, as well as other psychosocial factors of supervisor support or discrimination and things like that on the site, and how to deal with that. A big thing I want to talk about, which Karina mentioned yesterday, was a balance of positive and negative. We started the conversation with positive questions, and when we gave the data back to the committees that were working on this, it gave them, two things. It changed the conversation from the workers because it made them start thinking about sort of the systems level ideas, and not, instead of just being complaining, when they started talking about what could be improved, they actually had ideas that were, hey, well, this works over here, we can apply that here. So they actually, by talking about the good, it changed the whole conversation. And then it also helped the managers to accept it because they got recognition for what was really good, and that really changed that. And then also this framework helped us identify the working conditions that weren't always obvious through a walkthrough or some other method that's often used in construction. So I'm going to end it there and turn it over to Meg.
Hi, really nice to be here in this last portion of the conference. I want to talk to you about a project on workers in fulfillment centers in the e-commerce segment of the warehousing and storage industry. So the warehousing industry is an important site for understanding the current and future state of worker health and well-being for a number of reasons. First, the racial and ethnic composition of the industry reflects the future of American demographics. As the left-hand chart here shows, the warehousing industry has a higher proportion of Black and Latino workers and a lower representation of white workers than the American workforce at large. Second, as the right-hand chart shows, the industry is rapidly accelerating and has been on a steep growth trajectory since 2018. The slight dip in the center represents aligns with the pandemic, but as you can see, growth since the pandemic has already surpassed pre-pandemic numbers and is expected to continue. The warehousing industry is also a significant workplace to study because the rates of injury in it are so high. As you can see here, recordable injury rates over time are almost twice as high in warehousing as in all other industries. And lastly, despite how much we hear about Amazon in the news, there's actually limited research on this growing and diverse industry, and there's a lot more that we really need to learn about it. The fulfillment center workers face challenging and stressful work conditions, including physically demanding work with little control over how they accomplish their daily tasks. They typically face non-standard hours, which includes overtime, mandatory overtime, and they have limited control over when their work is scheduled, and they typically work in a time-pressured environment. Warehousing and storage is also a largely non-unionized population, and there are limited opportunities for workers to exercise voice about their workplace conditions on the job. Our study evaluates the efficacy of a participatory workplace intervention called Health and Wellbeing Committees, or HOCs. The HOC intervention is designed to improve the physical and mental health of fulfillment center employees by providing a channel for worker voice and leadership. The intervention is part of an ongoing cluster randomized trial, which includes 16 fulfillment center sites across the US. And that includes 8 fulfillment centers serving as treatment sites. We're currently in year 1 of launching the HOCs and collecting data. So HOCs are small committees composed of 8 to 12 frontline workers and led by 1 supervisor and 1 worker. They solicit, identify, and analyze challenges to health and well-being in 3 major areas, which include the psychosocial environment, health and safety, and work organization. Once a workplace concern is being prioritized, HOCs then design and implement solutions using tools from continuous improvement processes. The participatory design of the HOC allows us to tailor the intervention to the working conditions of each of the fulfillment center sites. Each HOC identifies and designs improvement projects based on the specific needs and concerns raised by the committee members as well as by workers on the floor. So the HOC consists of five-step process for addressing root causes of workplace concerns. These steps are first hearing workers' concerns. And this is a step which involves HOC members collecting comments which are submitted by associates on the floor of the warehouse, and then raising up these concerns for consideration in the meeting, as well as members raising up their own concerns. Second, the committee prioritizes these concerns according to their urgency and importance and identifies a focal concern to address. Third, the committee conducts a root cause analysis to understand the key causes of the problem. They then brainstorm solutions to the problem and define the focus of the improvement project. And finally, the group identifies and implements a set of action plans to address the problem. So I'd like to share an example of the HOC in action with an example of a project which targeted work organization at the warehouse. In the first step, several associates raised a concern about how stressful and confusing it was when the building's conveyor periodically stopped working. When this happened, production stopped and associates didn't know what to do. In the second step, the committee prioritized this concern as a high impact and urgent issue, and they voted to act on it as an improvement project. In the third step, the committee discussed the root causes of the stress and confusion, as well as why the conveyor was breaking down. In the next step, members decided that at least in the short term, they would not focus on plans to replace the equipment, which they felt wouldn't likely be successful given the building's financial constraints. And instead, they focused on creating a detailed plan for implementing manual production when the equipment broke down by coordinating communication and workflow across roles in the manual mode. And then in the fifth and final step, the HOC created colorful posters detailing the manual mode plan and placed them around the building. They also announced the plan in startup meetings in every department. HOC members reported in subsequent meetings that they noticed a significant reduction in stress and confusion among associates and a more orderly workflow on the floor when the conveyor did break down. So we're finding that a few aspects of the intervention are really key to making a difference in promoting successful project outcomes. First, the HOC process improvement steps provide a structured framework for promoting direct worker input into improving their experience of the workplace. Second, we're finding that the tools and training we give to workers on the processes of participatory decision-making are critical in helping them to take ownership of workplace problems and to act as agents in the process of actually improving these conditions. Third, the support of strong line managers seems to be key in enabling successful HOC committees and projects because they're able to act as conduits between hourly associates and upper management in effectively implementing HOC projects. Finally, a key ingredient to the effective functioning of HOCs is upper and middle management's willingness to consistently permit associates to take enough time off the floor and away from production to regularly attend HOC meetings and implement the projects. When managers are positive and supportive of associates' full engagement in the HOC, projects are less likely to lose momentum, and associates can effectively engage with the HOC to improve their workplace conditions. So in closing, although the data is not yet in on the overall efficacy of the HOC place intervention, our preliminary field work suggests that it holds promise as a channel for worker voice and well-being. Thanks.
So it's me again, stepping in for Dr. Susan Peters. This study is looking at, it's a bus driver study looking at bus drivers and transportation professional drivers as a whole suffer a great deal of different injury and health issues associated with their profession. We, for this project, was working with a bus company in Chile, south of Santiago, that had about 400 employees, that was contracted to transport workers from an urban area to a work site about 90 minutes of driving outside of that urban area. This company was very motivated to participate with this. They had a mature health and safety systems already in place, but they were wondering why no one was using their health facilities that they had developed, and was like, we need to be doing something different. The specific driving, this is actually a picture from where they drive to in Chile. Narrow winding roads through mountains, very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. And like I said, a single round one-way trip can take over an hour with that. So our approach here was really thinking of, again, you've seen this kind of graphic before of mainly a continuous improvement type of thing, where we stepped through different aspects of this, again, using worker experiences to inform what was going on. So I'm going to blow this up into the needs assessment that we did, which we did before we started the intervention. Actually, this is very similar to the food service study that we're going to hear about as well, where we talked to lots of different key informants in the organization, managers, foremans, and dispatchers and the like, and also had worker focus groups in doing that. Then we formed a steering committee, and that committee, which was a joint committee of managers and workers, came together to prioritize and learn, and we to prioritize and also learn more, some ideas and looking at what was going on. And then the steering committee actually guided the process. So there was a couple prioritized working conditions from the workers and from the managers in those meetings. And that was really looking at scheduling and routes. And that was just kind of the job demands and how the work was organized was crucial to impacting their safety, health, and well-being. Even, the long shifts, and there was a couple notorious routes that everybody hated to be assigned to, and often people would get stuck in those routes. And so those were some of the things that we actually talked about. And also people not taking their vacations or being able to be flexible with their vacations in terms of that. So those were some of the things they prioritized. The other thing was building a culture of trust between the drivers and supervisors through improved communications. Again, it was sort of bus drivers, if they were late and it wasn't really anything they could do, would often get yelled at by their managers because the managers were trying to keep everybody on schedule, and it was really due to other circumstances and not understanding. So that was a huge issue that they identified, and just started the communications with that. The other thing they did was through this was they also started implementing employee feedback on a regular basis. They liked this program so much they actually got a journal that workers could write in on one side. On the other side, the management had to respond to those comments. And so there was actually they used multiple ways of communicating with workers. On the conditions of work about changing driver routes and schedules, one of the things is they really looked at that long route that everybody was complaining about and said, okay, we got to change this. And they reduced it, and they also made it they made it shorter and more manageable. The other thing was they started looking at scheduling so that no one would ever get stuck in that hole of always driving that route. And so they tried to make sure that no driver would return, work on that, but also with the challenging ones. But they also looked at, if they had one challenging route in a day, that they would, the rest of their routes would be easier. And so a lot of work around dispatching came about of this and looking at it. what really made a difference here. Part of this was that, there were members of the committee that had come and worked and come to a training that we had done with another partner that we have in Chile, the Mutual de Surrogad, and looking at, they had come to a training and really sort of said, hey, this looks like something that can help us a lot. And so they were already trained, and they were our main facilitators. So that was very exciting that they sort of had an idea, and it made it a lot easier because there were two people and they were part of it. We had participation at all levels throughout the intervention. We were in meetings with the CEO, the CFO, as well as the union and shop leaders and the stewards. All key stakeholders were included in the action planning and implementation, including the client. So that route, they worked for our client, and that route was actually a requirement from the mine that actually, the mine in the mountains that had, said, oh, you have to go over here. And so they actually, one of the meetings that when we were doing the workshop, they last minute brought in the client and said, hey, we want to work on it. And the client didn't like it either. So it was kind of a mutual win-win for everyone. And then the other thing was, that the system continued to provide multiple awareness for workers and provide ongoing feedback, which happened right after we had initiated this process. They had the social unrest of November of 2019 and then COVID. And the program proved useful in helping them navigate and be resilient as an organization through those challenging times. So I'm going to turn it back to Glorian, who's going to talk about food service.
Great. Hopefully you're starting to see a few little themes running across some of these issues and some of these different settings. So even though we're in different settings, there are some common issues as we're trying to implement organizational change and improvements in working conditions. I'm going to talk about our food service study, which Karina mentioned briefly yesterday in her presentation. This was a study done in collaboration with a large international food service firm. And in particular, in this setting, they offered food service within corporate settings. So they had clients who were corporations or business offices, and the food service was offered within the client's setting. So that meant the relationships were a little complex, where the operation was actually situated in the client facility, and oftentimes the tasks were dependent upon the contract between the food service organization and the client. So that's in this way, it was kind of a small workplace, employing just a few people in that setting, or maybe 20 people, but embedded in this larger organization of the food service firm, but also the larger organization of the client organization. This was not a unionized site, so we had some limits with that as well. These were the job tasks were typical in terms of what you might imagine with a corporate cafeteria, such as those listed here, which we typically think of as having high physical demands, but also the psychosocial demands of a busy schedule with a lot of pressures and competing time demands. Our needs assessment basically followed a two-step process. In the first phase, we were looking at this corporate-wide, where we were really trying to think about company-wide, what were some of the kinds of working conditions that we might really want to think about. We did a series of formative research projects, including focus groups and interviews, site observations, surveys, and actually a workshop that was sort of like a sense-making workshop, trying to pull together the information. Using that, we identified 3 working conditions that we wanted to focus on, listed here: ergonomics and safety, work intensity, and job enrichment. Then we moved to the site level where we did additional kinds of site-specific assessments, where we really tried to take information about those 3 working conditions and actually look at them within the site. So what we basically had was an intervention design that was sequentially delivered modules focusing on each of the working conditions, that was partly monitored through this steering committee at the district and national levels, but also site-specific. That is the individual cafeterias. There were 5 of them that we were working with. And that planning process included the site assessments listed here in order to really focus not only on how to engage the worker manager in the changes that we were targeting, but also how to focus on worker engagement. So our intervention process might be illustrated just through one option here with the job enrichment piece, where we were really looking at how to take the site level assessments to identify priorities for the individual site. That included things like workers were getting inconsistent feedback from their managers, and yet managers didn't quite know how to do that. There weren't really the career paths available for frontline workers that they could guide them in. And they were motivated, but not really trained in terms of how to provide those resources. So we adapted some company resources in order to provide tailored coaching and feedback. Yet we still encountered some barriers to consistent implementation of this approach, given the variability in the leadership support, high turnover rates, particularly here among the corporate, the site managers, and the many competing demands that they faced. So what we saw here was that it's really important to respond to some of the site-specific priorities based on that needs assessment. We needed to do some considerable adaptations to the high demand environment, building on existing company resources, and also trying to embed some of the new manager roles in the job responsibilities in their actual job responsibilities in order that we could establish accountability long-term. We've, as a center, been talking a lot about how to think about these issues, trying to incorporate them into our thinking in our future interventions and our outreach efforts. What we see as some of the core recommendations are those listed here, and I'll invite Karina to join us on the panel as I just briefly go over these. Obviously, we need to tailor our needs assessment process to the individual setting as we identify some priority working conditions. We're trying to make sure that we're getting worker input, but we see that, as you can see across these different examples, that how we got worker input differed from one place to the next. We need to facilitate upper management support and leadership commitment, and that oftentimes takes some training within that process, as we have heard about from others during the conference. We need to ensure that the resources are available for responding to the solutions that are generated. But as you can see in our examples across these 4 sites, it's important to look at the contextual barriers that are going to vary from one place to another. So we've tried to leave some time here for conversation and dialogue. And so I'm going to open it up now. We're just all going to sit over here, and please, we welcome your discussion examples from your own settings or whatever. Thank you. Christina, please go ahead and start.
Sure. Christina Banks, California Labor Lab. Question is, when you prioritize where you're going to make the improvements, what happens to the things that don't get on the list? And does the improvement you make diminish the priority for the things that didn't get on the list? In other words, is there an interaction there, or is there more work to do?
There's more to do. And a lot of our committees, especially in construction, they kept those lists, and we often also said, what are some of the short, I guess it's picking me up, what are the short-term wins that we can have, but then what are some of the longer things that require more partnerships, more engaging, working with the contractor, working with the owner to solve problems and the like. And so those things keep coming. And so it becomes that part of that continuous improvement process. And we just sort of identify the first things, the prioritization that we just saw in these first steps. So they keep a log and keep working on them.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jack. No surprise there.
The microphone.
Because it is, you say, things that don't get done, don't get prioritized, but it's also about capacity building. Jack mentioned it as well. So if you are in an organization, and I think these 4 organizations are really good examples of where you don't necessarily have work environment and health and well-being on the agenda. So it's about building capacity. You start with the low-hanging fruit, you start with the quick wins, you build capacity, you build self-efficacy, collective efficacy, and as you move along, you can start addressing those more serious issues. But when I was looking at it, I actually thought, we had this session yesterday about work organization. What is work organization? And I think that some of these examples are really the perfect example of of changes to work organization. And one of the things I always talk a lot about, I didn't yesterday, but I do in other settings, is quite often the kind of interventions that I've done in the action plans are people get frustrated when they can't do a good job. And these are really good examples of people want to do a good job, and these interventions can help them actually do a good job because you take away the barriers to doing that good job.
Right.
So let's turn over here to Christine.
Yes, hi. I have a question from one of our virtual attendees, and this is from Michelle Muncie. She's attending online, and she says, studies on high warehouse incident rates that I've seen identify slips, trips, falls, and struck by the top as the top incident types. What trainings have you found that seem effective for reducing these rates?
I actually can't answer that question. I am part of a larger team and I've sort of starting the project more recently, and I don't have that sort of deep knowledge to answer that question. So
Are you working with the traditional safety folks in these institutions? Yes,
yes, yes.
and that probably.
Yeah.
part.
And I think also, just if I can just kind of step in here,
Yeah.
because I have been somewhat involved as well, is that I think one of the things that we're trying to do with the Hawks, these health committees, is to really let workers prioritize and tell us, you know, what comes first for them. And that is, as I think one of the challenges we face in total worker health is that safety is always first, but we also recognize that sometimes workers may identify some issues that they want to see on the agenda that maybe are part and parcel of that, but be addressing some of the broader organizational and psychosocial issues.
And
And
I'll
I'm
ju-
going to move on to
Oh,
the next
sorry.
question because we have a lot of people. Lee?
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much for this session. One of the things that I really love is that you've got a system here for how you're collecting your needs assessment, et cetera, through that pathway. And now you've gone through that with an organization. I want to ask a question of you all and us about this as a path to capacity building in organizations. So we do our thing, we create the intervention, we help them through a methodology. Is there an opportunity to as we withdraw, as we leave, as we're no longer the consultants, we're no longer the researchers, empowering them to pick up where we left off for the next set of interventions that they want to invent, from needs assessment on through. And I think you intimated that you do some of that. I'm wondering what your experience has been in basically skills transfer to the organizations.
Yeah, so we saw that definitely in our transportation partners in Chile, that they actually had done some training with us before we even did the project, and then they adapted and took over some of the specific things, and actually were creating new solutions of how to get worker feedback and then how to respond to it. And as I said, that helped build resilience to that. We also saw it with a construction company where we came in with our specific steps, but then they modified it and adapted it to their organizational culture. It was sort of like we did it once with them, and we said, okay, let's go. We forced them through all these steps, but then they're like, well, this would work better if we did this way for us. And then they adapted it, and they, in fact, we talked to them just a year ago, almost 4 years after we started the project with them, and they were like, yeah, we're still doing this and stuff. So it's really, so we have seen that retention with these because they see the benefits for their own management systems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great session. I'm Daniel. I came from Guatemala and I work in a sugar mill, sugarcane mill. And we have a lot of drivers moving the cane from the field to the mill with similar difficulties that you mentioned before. So I was wondering if you dive into a little bit about chronic disease. And if you can share with us a couple comments or what are your findings about this risk? Thank you.
So again, I'm going to read, what Glorian said earlier about when we were working with the transportation, we went to the workers and they really prioritized the longer term concern was more the chronic issues. And they were trying to think about what were some of the things that are happening today, that would sort of impact some of their longer term things is sleep and fatigue and diet and having access to food. I mean, those were all the issues that came up that we were talking about that all, so we're way up, I think what we're addressing are some of the upstream issues to these chronic health issues. And that's what the conversation turned to. The management wanted to talk about obesity and diet, but the workers were like, no, I'm just too tired at the end of the day and I'm totally beat up. How can we change that? So we turned it back to the conditions of work in terms of how that impacts some of the upstream factors around the issues of that. And I also want to say about the slip, trips, and falls, there's slip, trips, and falls. A huge biomechanical aspect of that for slip, trips, and falls is cognitive aspects. There's cognitive biomechanics and environmental. And so the stress can really, reducing the stress can help out as well. So common pathways, which comes back to your point of the common pathways that exist through the conditions of work that impact these longer term chronic issues. Sorry,
So
I went on.
I see that we are now that is now time to move on.
Unfortunately, they moved it up even more.
Okay,
So,
great.
so
Thank
let's-
you all so much. We appreciate the dialogue.
you.
Will be available later for conversation.